Authority doesn't knock before it enters your driveway. It waits for you to make a mistake. At exactly 6:47 a.m., the metallic snap of bolt cutters echoed through the stillness of Willowbrook Estates, sharp and deliberate, the kind of sound that doesn't belong in a neighborhood where sprinklers hiss on schedule and coffee brews behind spotless kitchen windows. I was already awake. Habit. Years of early briefings and quiet streets trained my body to rise before the sun. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, motion alert from the driveway camera. I didn't rush. I didn't swear. I just picked it up and watched. Victoria Hensley stood in my driveway wearing a pastel tracksuit and that tight, satisfied smile she reserves for issuing violations. The chain around my Jeep's wool clamp glinted under the porch light. Her gloved hands adjusted the bolt cutters like she was trimming hedges instead of cutting private property. The crunch of gravel under her shoes carried through the microphone. Clang. The chain dropped. She stepped back, pleased with herself, and waved toward the tow truck idling at the curb. Diesel fumes drifted in faintly even through the closed window, that familiar mechanical scent mixing with the early morning air. My Jeep Wrangler sat there, matte gray, government-issued tires still dusted from last week's field work, looking like any other off-duty vehicle to someone who didn't know what they were looking at. To Victoria, it was an unauthorized commercial eyesore. To me, it was an assigned asset tied to a multi-agency task force that didn't advertise its schedule on HOA letterhead. The tow operator hopped out, clipboard in hand, avoiding eye contact the way contractors do when they know the paperwork is thin. Victoria handed him a document with the HOA seal at the top. I could almost hear her voice from the last board meeting. We must protect property values. She ruled this cul-de-sac like a suburban monarch, measuring grass height with a ruler and issuing fines for mailbox shades that were 2 tones off regulation beige. What she didn't measure was jurisdiction. The flatbed lowered with a hydraulic hum, metal scraping softly against pavement as they prepared to winch the Jeep up. I noticed small details most people miss. The way she positioned herself for the best camera angle from her own doorbell. The way she checked the street twice to make sure neighbors were watching. She wanted witnesses. She wanted applause. She wanted to prove that no one was above HOA authority. I set my feet on the cool hardwood floor and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle. No yelling. No running outside in pajama pants. Just the steady rhythm of my breathing and the faint whir of the winch cable tightening. There's a difference between someone breaking a rule and someone breaking federal protocol. Victoria didn't know that difference yet, but she was about to. The winch cable tightened with a steady mechanical whir, and my Jeep eased forward inch by inch, the tires rolling over my own driveway like it no longer belonged there. I watched Victoria step back, folding her arms, chin slightly lifted, supervising like she had just improved the neighborhood instead of crossed a line she did not understand. The tow truck lights flashed amber against the pale siding of the houses across the street. Curtains shifted. People were watching. They always watch when the HOA makes an example out of someone. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. The aroma filled the air, rich and steady, grounding. I have learned something over the years. When someone believes they have power, they want you to react. They want raised voices, frantic explanations, maybe even apologies. Silence unsettles them more than anger ever could. By the time I stepped outside, the Jeep was halfway up the flatbed. The morning air carried the faint smell of diesel and freshly cut grass from a neighbor who took pride in beating the sunrise with his mower. Victoria turned when she heard my front door close. Her expression shifted for half a second, just enough to register that I was calm. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her sleeve. "We issued multiple notices. The vehicle violates community guidelines." I nodded once and glanced at the clipboard in the driver's hand. "You received my response," I said evenly. She smiled. "You never submitted the proper exemption paperwork." That was not true. I had submitted exactly what was required, stamped and acknowledged. But this was not about paperwork for her. It was about precedent. She wanted the neighborhood to see that even I could not park something she disapproved of in plain sight. The tow operator cleared his throat. "Sir, if you have a problem, you can take it up with the HOA office." His voice carried that careful neutrality of someone who prefers not to get involved. I stepped closer, close enough to see the tiny scratch near the rear fender where the clamp had pressed. Small detail. Important detail. Where are you taking it? I asked. Redstone Impound. About 12 miles east, he replied. 12 miles. Past city limits. Past comfortable jurisdiction for a homeowners association. I gave a slow nod and took out my phone. Not to film. Not to argue. I scrolled through contacts until I reached a number that does not appear on business cards. Victoria shifted her weight. There is no need to escalate this, she said lightly, though her fingers tightened around her folder. I pressed call. The line connected on the second ring. Operations, a voice answered. Professional. Direct. Asset has been removed from secured residential location, I said. No emotion. Just facts. There was a brief pause on the other end. Was the asset compromised? Confirmed unauthorized physical interference and transport initiated. The tow truck engine revved as if on cue. Victoria's smile faltered, just slightly, as she caught only fragments of what I was saying. She thought she had won a neighborhood dispute. She did not yet understand she had triggered a protocol that did not belong to her community guidelines. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The flatbed rolled forward, carrying more than just a Jeep. Victoria watched me carefully now, searching my face for panic, for anger, for anything that would reassure her she was still in control. I gave her nothing. By 8:30 that morning, Willowbrook Estates looked the same as it always did. Manicured lawns trimmed to regulation height, flags hanging perfectly still in the mild spring air, sprinklers ticking in careful arcs like synchronized clocks. The only difference was the empty space in my driveway, a rectangle of clean concrete where tire tread had rested for months. Absence has a weight to it. You feel it even when everything looks ordinary. My phone vibrated again at 8:42 a.m. Operations. Location confirmed, the voice said. Vehicle arrived at Redstone Impound at 8:31. Facility is being secured. I could picture it without being there. The chain-link fence, the faint smell of hot rubber and oil, rows of repossessed sedans baking under the rising sun. My Jeep would not blend in for long. Local law enforcement notified? I asked. Affirmative. Federal liaison en route. Stand by. Stand by. 2 words that have a way of stretching time. I stepped back inside and set my coffee mug in the sink. Through the front window, I could see Victoria across the street, already on her phone, pacing with the kind of restless energy that follows a public display of authority. She believed she had sent a message this morning. She believed she had reinforced order. What she did not understand was that federal property does not become local just because it is parked in a residential driveway. At 9:17 a.m., a black sedan turned into the neighborhood without flashing lights or dramatic presence. It moved slowly, deliberate, like it was reading the street instead of driving through it. A second vehicle followed 5 minutes later, city-issued but unmarked. Curtains shifted again. People notice different things when cars like that appear. The sedan stopped 2 houses down from mine. A man stepped out wearing a navy windbreaker with a small embroidered emblem over the chest, subtle enough that only someone trained would recognize it. He did not look rushed. He did not look angry. He looked focused. He approached my front door, and I opened it before he knocked. Caldwell, he said with a brief nod. Interference report verified. Tow company documentation obtained. We are classifying this as unauthorized seizure of a federally assigned operational asset. The words were calm, clinical, precise. In the distance, Victoria's pacing slowed. She was watching now, no longer pretending not to care. Any breach of equipment? He asked. Not yet confirmed, I replied. Chain was cut. Clamp removed. He exhaled quietly, not frustration, just acknowledgement. Redstone Yard is being temporarily restricted pending inspection. Tow operator is cooperating. Across the street, Victoria lowered her phone slowly, her posture stiffening as she registered the emblem on the windbreaker. She had dealt with city inspectors before. She had dealt with county clerks. This was different. The unmarked city vehicle parked behind the sedan and 2 uniformed officers stepped out, not to intimidate, not to escalate, but to observe. Documentation changes tone when multiple agencies start asking for it. The morning sun climbed higher, reflecting off polished windows and casting sharp lines across driveways that suddenly felt less certain. Victoria took a tentative step off the curb. Folder clutched tightly against her chest. She looked like someone who had prepared for a neighborhood dispute and instead walked into a jurisdiction she could not measure with a ruler. I remained on my porch, hands relaxed at my sides, listening to the faint hum of engines idling and the soft rustle of wind moving through trimmed hedges. Authority does not need to announce itself. It arrives, it assesses, and it adjusts the balance quietly. Victoria crossed the street slowly, heels clicking against the pavement in measured steps that tried to project confidence, but carried the faintest edge of hesitation. The wind caught a loose strand of her hair, and she brushed it back, tightening her grip on the folder pressed to her chest. Up close, I could see the fine tension around her eyes, the way her jaw flexed as she calculated what story she would tell next. The man in the navy windbreaker turned toward her before she even spoke. "Ma'am," he said calmly, holding up a hand just enough to pause her approach. "Are you the individual who authorized the removal of the gray Jeep from this address?" She lifted her chin. "As president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, I enforce community guidelines regarding unauthorized vehicles." The word unauthorized landed heavy in the quiet air. One of the city officers opened a small notebook and began writing. The scratch of pen against paper sounded louder than it should have. "Do you have documentation supporting your authority to seize and transport that vehicle?" the agent asked. Victoria opened her folder quickly, flipping through printed violation notices, highlighted bylaws, and a copy of a towing request form stamped with the HOA seal. She handed them over with steady hands, but her breathing had shifted, shallow and controlled. The agent scanned the top page, eyes moving left to right without expression. "Did you verify ownership of the vehicle through state registration prior to removal?" he asked. Victoria hesitated for half a second. "The vehicle was parked in violation of our standards," she replied. That was not an answer. The city officer exchanged a glance with the agent, subtle but unmistakable. "Ma'am," the agent continued, voice even, "this vehicle is assigned under federal operational authority. Interference with secured government assets triggers automatic review." The phrase automatic review hung in the air like a storm warning. A neighbor's garage door hummed, opened down the block, and then quickly shut again. People were listening. Victoria blinked, confusion flickering across her face before she tried to recover. "I was not informed of any such designation," she said, the sharp edge returning to her tone. "There was no visible marking." "Designation does not require neighborhood notification," the agent replied. He folded her paperwork neatly and handed it back. "We will need copies of all HOA correspondence regarding this address, including internal emails and board minutes." The color drained slightly from her cheeks. Internal emails meant timelines. Timelines meant intent. "This is completely unnecessary," she said, voice tightening. "We were simply maintaining standards." The city officer finally spoke, calm and clear. "Standards do not override jurisdiction." The breeze shifted, carrying the faint scent of asphalt warming under the sun. Across the street, Victoria's husband stepped out onto their porch, arms crossed, watching but not approaching. "Authority feels different when it is not yours." I stayed where I was, hands relaxed, letting the process move at its own pace. The agent turned back to me briefly. "Redstone Yard is secured. Inspection team is on site. We will update you shortly." Victoria stood very still now, folder pressed flat against her side, the morning confidence replaced with something quieter and far less certain. The balance had shifted, not with raised voices, not with threats, but with paperwork and protocol moving exactly the way it was designed to. By late morning, the neighborhood had shifted from curiosity to calculation. The black sedan remained parked with quiet authority, and a second federal vehicle pulled up near the corner, subtle but deliberate. Redstone Impound had been placed under temporary administrative hold at 10:12 a.m., and the inspection team was already cataloging every inch of the Jeep. I received the update in a calm, measured voice through my phone. Exterior chain cut confirmed. No forced entry into the cabin. Equipment seals intact. Full inventory underway. I could almost hear the faint echo of the impound yard in the background, metal gates clinking, a forklift humming somewhere beyond the fence. 12 miles away, paperwork was multiplying. Back on our street, Victoria stood in the shade of her maple tree, speaking in low tones to her husband, who kept glancing toward the federal agents as if trying to gauge how serious this had become. The wind carried the crisp scent of freshly printed paper as one of the city officers retrieved additional forms from his vehicle. Documentation has a sound to it, pages separating, staples clicking into place, pins moving with steady intent. It does not shout, but it reshapes everything. At 10:37 a.m., the agent approached Victoria again. "We will require immediate access to HOA digital correspondence regarding this address for the past 90 days, he said. "Failure to comply may result in obstruction review." Obstruction review. That phrase landed harder than the earlier warning. Her posture tightened. "This is excessive," she replied, but her voice had lost its polished confidence. Across the street, a neighbor stepped onto her porch with a cup of coffee, pretending to water plants while listening. The quiet hum of suburban routine continued, but beneath it there was tension, like air before a thunderstorm. My phone vibrated once more. Tow operator statement recorded. Operations informed me. He acknowledged acting under HOA directive without verifying ownership classification. Yard manager unaware of federal assignment. This will expand. Expand. That was the word that mattered. What began as a local enforcement display was widening into interagency documentation. The agent glanced toward me briefly, a small nod that required no translation. The system was moving. Victoria opened her folder again, flipping pages as if the right bylaw might reverse physics. "We were protecting property values," she insisted, softer now. The city officer responded without looking up from his notes. "Property values are not a federal category." A faint siren wailed somewhere far beyond the subdivision, unrelated but symbolic, a reminder that jurisdictions overlap in ways that homeowners associations rarely consider. At 11:05 a.m., a third call came through. Preliminary assessment complete. Asset to be returned following formal review. Recommend notification of legal counsel on your end. I exhaled slowly, feeling the balance settle. Across the street, Victoria's husband lowered his arms and stepped back inside their house without a word. Authority had changed shape in front of him. The maple leaves rustled overhead, sunlight flickering across driveways that now felt less certain than they had at sunrise. Victoria remained standing on the curb, folder clutched tightly, the realization slowly setting in that she had not removed a vehicle. She had triggered a chain reaction that did not recognize HOA boundaries. By noon the sun sat high over Willowbrook Estates, bright and indifferent, casting sharp shadows across lawns trimmed to perfection. The black sedan was gone, the unmarked city vehicle had followed, and the street looked almost ordinary again. Almost. The kind of quiet that follows official conversations lingers in the air. It feels heavier than noise. I was inside reviewing a forwarded incident summary when my phone vibrated again. "Transport approved," operations said. "Asset will be returned under escort at 1300 hours. Formal inquiry initiated regarding unauthorized seizure and chain of authorization." Chain of authorization. That phrase mattered more than anything else today. Outside, Victoria's front door opened and closed twice in quick succession. She was moving between rooms, blinds shifting, lights flicking on and off despite the daylight. She was calling someone. Attorney, perhaps. Or maybe a board member who had approved the towing request without reading the fine print. Power is easy when it is ceremonial. It becomes complicated when signatures are examined under scrutiny. At 12:48 p.m., a flatbed rolled back into the neighborhood, slower this time, escorted by a city unit that kept a respectful distance. The hydraulic lift lowered with a soft mechanical sigh. My Jeep emerged exactly as it had left, matte gray under the sun, only now it carried a different weight. The tow operator stepped out first, his earlier neutrality replaced by careful politeness. "Sir," he said, voice measured, "we have been instructed to return the vehicle immediately. There will be no charge." No charge. As if this were about money. The agent in the Navy windbreaker stood nearby, clipboard in hand, observing every movement. The winch cable released with a metallic click and the tires touched my driveway again. The sound was simple, rubber meeting concrete, but it felt like a line being redrawn. I walked around the Jeep slowly, noting the clean cut where the chain had been severed, the faint mark on the wheel clamp. Small details become evidence when documentation expands. The agent approached. Preliminary review indicates the HOA directive bypassed state verification protocols, he said quietly. Further inquiry will determine intent. Intent. That word hung between us. Across the street, Victoria stood behind her window, no longer on the curb, no longer projecting authority. Watching. Calculating. The escort vehicle idled for a moment before pulling away, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves and distant lawn equipment humming somewhere down the block. The agent handed me a copy of the incident acknowledgement form. Crisp paper. Official seal. You will be contacted if additional testimony is required, he said. I nodded once. Understood. When they left, the street fell back into suburban rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. Curtains did not move this time. Neighbors had already seen enough. I bent down and replaced the wheel clamp, locking it with a new chain, thicker steel, heavier links. The click of the padlock closing sounded final. Across the street, Victoria's blinds closed completely. Authority does not always roar. Sometimes it returns quietly to where it belongs and lets the paperwork speak for itself. The afternoon settled into that deceptive suburban calm where everything looks restored but nothing feels the same. By 3:15, the sun had shifted west, and the light hitting my driveway turned warmer, softer, almost forgiving. My Jeep sat exactly where it belonged, new chain secured, the heavier steel links catching the light with a dull, steady shine. I ran my hand along the hood, feeling the faint warmth from earlier transport. No dents, no forced entry. The seals inside had been confirmed intact. Still, the knowledge of how easily it had been moved lingered like a thin layer of dust you cannot quite see but know is there. At 4 o'clock, my phone vibrated with a formal notification. Preliminary administrative review expanded to include HOA governance procedures. Operations informed me. Digital correspondence requests submitted through appropriate channels. Appropriate channels. That meant subpoenas if necessary. That meant servers, timestamps, internal threads where tone reveals more than policy. Across the street, Victoria's garage door opened halfway and stopped, as if she had changed her mind mid-motion. A few minutes later, it lowered again. The choreography of uncertainty. Around 5, a white SUV with county markings rolled slowly down the block and parked near the corner. Not dramatic. Not urgent. Just present. A county administrative investigator stepped out carrying a slim leather portfolio. He did not approach my house. He walked directly to Victoria's front door and knocked twice. Firm. Even. The sound traveled cleanly across the pavement. I could not hear what was said inside, but I could see posture through the side window. Shoulders tight. Arms moving sharply. Paperwork exchanged. The investigator remained composed, head nodding slightly, as if confirming dates and signatures. 10 minutes later, he left with the same measured pace, portfolio now thicker than before. The SUV drove off without sirens, without spectacle. The message was clear enough. Authority had multiplied quietly. At 6:30, the neighborhood board group chat lit up. I do not participate, but I observe. Screenshots began circulating among residents. An emergency HOA meeting scheduled for Friday at 7 p.m. Agenda Item 1, Leadership Review. Agenda Item 2, Legal Exposure Assessment. Words matter. They reveal pressure points. The evening air cooled, carrying the scent of charcoal from a barbecue somewhere down the street. Normal life resumed in fragments. Kids rode bicycles in lazy loops. A dog barked once and then fell silent. Across from me, Victoria's porch lights flicked on earlier than usual. Through the window, I saw her seated at the dining table, laptop open, reading with the intensity of someone who had underestimated a clause. My phone vibrated one last time before sunset. Case status. Active review. Operations stated. No further action required from you at this time. That was the quietest victory of all. No dramatic confrontation. No raised voices. Just process unfolding the way it was designed to. I stepped back onto my porch and listened to the hum of evening insects beginning their rhythm. The driveway no longer felt exposed. It felt anchored. Across the street, the blinds remained closed. In neighborhoods like this, reputation travels faster than any official letter. And once it shifts, it does not easily return to its original shape. Friday evening arrived with the kind of tension that makes even perfectly trimmed hedges look suspicious. At 6:58 p.m., the Willowbrook Estates clubhouse lights flicked on, bright rectangles cutting through the dimming sky. I did not need to attend. I did not need to speak. But I walked down the sidewalk anyway, hands in my jacket pockets, the cool air carrying the faint scent of chlorine from the community pool behind the building. Through the wide front windows, I could see folding chairs arranged in neat rows, and a long table at the front where the board usually sat with rehearsed confidence. Tonight, the chairs filled slowly with neighbors who kept their voices low, heads leaning close in quiet conversation. Victoria stood near the front, papers stacked carefully in front of her, posture rigid. The room did not feel like it belonged to her anymore. At 7 o'clock sharp, one of the board members cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. His voice sounded thinner than usual. Agenda Item 1, Leadership Review. The words echoed slightly against the tiled floor. A second board member began reading from a prepared statement about compliance procedures and exposure to liability. Legal exposure. That phrase made several people shift in their seats. I remained near the back wall, silent, observing. Victoria attempted to regain footing. She spoke about protecting property values, about maintaining standards, about acting in the best interest of the community. But each sentence felt rehearsed and slightly off rhythm, like someone reading a script they no longer believed in. Then came the documentation. Copies of the county inquiry notice were distributed. Printed emails were referenced, including internal messages where urgency had replaced due diligence. The room grew quieter with each page turned. You could hear the soft scrape of paper sliding across plastic folding tables. One neighbor stood up and asked a simple question. Did we verify ownership before authorizing removal? Victoria's answer faltered. She referenced bylaws again. Another neighbor followed. Were we informed this could involve federal jurisdiction? Silence stretched. The air felt heavier than earlier that week. Thicker, charged not with anger, but with realization. A motion was introduced to suspend the acting president pending legal review. It was not dramatic. No one shouted. No one applauded. The vote happened by raised hand, steady and visible. The majority was clear. Victoria's shoulders stiffened as the decision was recorded in the minutes. Authority shifted in real time, not with spectacle, but with procedure. Outside, crickets had begun their steady chorus, the sound drifting faintly through the clubhouse doors each time someone stepped out to make a call. By 7:45, the meeting adjourned with an interim chairperson appointed. The tone was cautious, measured, focused on damage control. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the night air felt cooler, cleaner somehow. Across the parking lot, Victoria exited alone, folder clutched tightly against her side. She did not look at anyone. She walked to her car without the practiced smile she once wore like armor. In neighborhoods like this, leadership can feel permanent until paperwork says otherwise. And once the minutes are written, the record does not forget. Saturday morning arrived quieter than the one before, the kind of quiet that feels earned. The sun rose slow over Willowbrook Estates, casting a pale gold line across my driveway and catching on the heavier chain I had installed 2 days earlier. The steel links looked solid, deliberate, no longer ornamental. I stepped outside with a fresh cup of coffee, the steam rising into cool air that still carried a hint of damp grass. My Jeep sat exactly where it belonged, matte gray surface clean, steady, unremarkable to anyone who did not understand what it represented. Across the street, Victoria's house looked different without her presence on the porch. No clipboard, no early patrol, just closed blinds and a mailbox that had not yet been checked. The interim board chair had sent a formal community email at 8:12 a.m., acknowledging leadership transition and confirming cooperation with ongoing administrative review. The language was careful, almost clinical. Commitment to compliance. Restoration of trust. Words chosen to calm a neighborhood that had watched authority unravel in real time. My phone vibrated once more around 9. Operations. Case status updated. Internal review concluded. No operational compromise. External interference documented and referred. That meant the file would move beyond this street, beyond Willowbrook, into offices where jurisdiction is measured in statutes instead of landscaping codes. No further action required from you, the voice added. I thanked them and ended the call. The finality felt different than victory. It felt balanced. Around 10, a moving truck idled briefly in front of Victoria's house. Not large, not dramatic, just enough to load a few boxes. Neighbors pretended not to stare, but everyone noticed. Reputation in a place like this is currency. Once devalued, it rarely rebounds. By midday, the truck was gone. The porch lights remained off. The maple tree in her yard rustled gently, indifferent to human hierarchy. I walked down to the curb and looked back at my driveway from the street. Everything appeared normal. That was the lesson. Real authority does not advertise itself. It does not need decorative pillars or stamped seals to feel secure. It operates quietly, verifies carefully, and corrects without spectacle. I replaced the padlock once more, testing the weight of it in my hand before snapping it shut. The click echoed softly against the garage door. Across the subdivision, lawn mowers started their steady hum. Children's laughter drifted from a backyard trampoline, and life resumed its suburban rhythm. But something fundamental had changed beneath the surface. The board would be more cautious now. Tow requests would be verified. Emails would be written with an awareness that they might someday be read in a different room under brighter lights. I finished my coffee and stepped back onto the porch, listening to the simple sounds of a neighborhood returning to routine. Justice did not arrive with sirens or speeches. It arrived with documentation, with process, with signatures placed exactly where they needed to be. She believed she controlled the street. In the end, the street reminded her who actually writes the rules.